Welcome everyone to the Learning to Birth webinar series, where we interview some of the world's most inspiring thought leaders about birth and pregnancy. Today we have with us Giulia Piazza. Welcome, Giulia.
Thank you. It's such a treat to be here with you all today.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, everyone. Giulia Piazza is an international author, prenatal yoga specialist, and birth doula. And Giulia is also the creator of Birth Wisdom Yoga prenatal and postpartum yoga classes, birth partner workshops, and prenatal yoga teacher trainings. That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, so it's definitely a dream to be able to take all of the doula wisdom from the families I've worked with for almost 20 years and be able to lace it into my book and prenatal yoga classes and now share it with teachers all over the world. So we can have birth wisdom yoga classes for women everywhere.
So we've just stolen Giulia away from, she's about to be teaching a yoga teacher training class for the prenatal yoga. So we're really lucky to have her here. Do you want to tell us what prenatal yoga is and how you got into it?
Sure. Well, typically a prenatal yoga class is designed specifically for women that are pregnant. And, even more specifically for a birth wisdom yoga class, which I teach, the idea is that we are offering up research-based poses that we know will open up the pelvis, change the shape of the pelvis, and help women prepare for labor and childbirth. And then, another layer to that is that you create a community of women, which is so vital and important for women when they're pregnant, because sometimes it can be very isolating. So, hopefully in a prenatal yoga class, we have birth preparation, we have a community of women and research-based poses to help women actually take with them into labor and childbirth.
Pregnancy yoga, when I did it, was probably one of the most favorite experiences that I had of being pregnant, because it was that hour and a half where you could just focus on you. Often the room is dark and the poses were so comfortable. And it was just this blissful experience to do it twice a week. And I'm so grateful for that practice. Do you want to tell us some of the ways that yoga during pregnancy can be good for us?
Yeah, sure. And, one of the things you just reminded me of is really one of the things as a doula teaching prenatal yoga is that we're hoping that we're creating an environment that's very similar to the birthing room, because we know if we can create that cocoon effect with the lights dim, voices are low, everybody is really there to support the women in the room and each other, then women will have a better birthing experience. So typically, that the value of that alone is so great for women. So, and also if we can think about the birthing room while we're teaching a prenatal yoga class, then women are taking that into their births as well. So we are empowering them, mentally and physically. And we know that women typically have lower interventions when they practice prenatal yoga, and a mental and physical stamina that they may not have if they had not been practicing. And probably one of my favorite things, which I often say to the women in my classes, is just the yoga breathing alone. So those long, slow breaths are the one thing they can control in labor. It's, the one thing that will get them through, and no matter what their labor looks like, and something that we can practice in prenatal yoga that they'll take into labor and birth and mothering. And then beyond that, it's that beautiful community and that sense of well-being we create that's so good for women in the classes as well.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful experience. You've just brought something up there, which is the stamina that you require for birth. I don't think anything could have prepared me. I had an active labor for my first child, and it was all natural. And obviously, without an epidural, I wasn't connected to anything. I could get up, get down. I don't think I've ever had such sore thighs in my whole life.
For sure. And
afterwards,
absolutely.
I'm so tired.
Oh, I know. And it reminds me of, one of the things I often say also is that, labor and childbirth is a marathon in one way or another. And we often lose a night of sleep, unless you're one of the lucky women with, a really speedy labor. But typically that's the case. And so by, practicing poses that are challenging in yoga, we can have women drop into the breath and really kind of feel what it would be like to be in labor and birth using the breath, and then connecting to their inner birthing power and strength. And so you just reminded me of another part of that. As a prenatal yoga teacher, you know, we're offering the sacred space for women to tap into their power, their vision for their birth, not ours. And so that's why I do what I do, is because what's better than being in, you know, that room and that circle with women that are pregnant.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful time that you can just learn to dream again, and learn to you know, dream about what you want for yourself and your baby. It's a beautiful time. You've mentioned the hip opening exercises. Do you want to talk to us about how like those poses can really help us when we come to give birth?
Yeah, you know, it's so funny because for years, you know, many years, women, I think when they're supported in labor, have been coming into poses that open up the hips, the pelvis. So things like hands and knees, pelvic circles, pelvic rocking, maybe leaning into the wall and finding those pelvic circles, maybe even reaching up onto some sort of rope that, you know, is so wonderful if women have that type of tradition as well in their culture. And so then what we find is now there's research out of Europe and France with books that actually show the drawings of women pregnant in these poses, but it shows the pelvis, it shows the way the bones move. And so we know that if we can move the way a woman is placing her feet, whether she's on hands and knees and maybe cat and cow pose or pelvic circles, if we take those poses to the wall and she still is finding maybe an asymmetrical stance in her feet, then we're changing the movement of the pelvis. So now we're helping babies rotate to be born. And then also if she finds, maybe she sits on a birth ball and she leans over a chair and she's finding some nice small pelvic circles, well then even we know that this creates a siphon effect for a baby to come out of that higher greater part of the pelvis than into the lower part of the pelvis. So, you know, women, I just think have been doing this for years when they're supported. And now I love that we have this kind of concrete research saying, yes, change the shape of her feet, move her hips, and wow, look what happens, you know.
That's really interesting because when I've done yoga anatomy classes with teachers, and you learn how everybody's, you know, our hips functionally, like the bones are a different shape, right? So one pose that might be opening for someone isn't opening for someone else, and it's all depending on, you know, them and their unique, where they put their feet and everything. So what you've said is so true. Such a unique experience for someone who's not done yoga before, and they hear about this thing called pregnancy yoga. What should they, you know, do if they want to come along? Like, what should they expect?
Well, number one, I think they should check in with their midwife or their care provider, make sure that yoga is safe for them. So that's not something that their prenatal yoga teacher would decide for them. That's something that it should be from their care provider. And then from there, I think it's one of those things, it's kind of like interviewing a doula where, you know, you kind of get a feeling for the energy and the spirit of that person. And so, you know, maybe it's nice sometimes prenatal yoga teachers will say first class is free. That's something I always do so women can come in, get a feel for it. And then from there, I think it's really important to be sure that the teacher that they are taking their class from is hopefully a labor and birth doula, because that's just a whole other realm. And hopefully they've also completed a prenatal yoga teacher training with a labor and birth doula. And I say that because I've done a few different trainings, of course, yoga teacher trainings, I've done prenatal yoga teacher trainings, and nothing compares to having a doula who has been in the labor room teach a prenatal yoga teacher training. So then we have all these other layers that are so important, even the perception of who are you holding space for and how are you holding space. And when you've been in a room with a woman who's pregnant and then in labor, you can kind of take that as well into the prenatal yoga room. So I would say look for someone who really is passionate. This is something they're doing because they love it, because then there's going to be different layers of knowledge and exploration on their part that is going to make it so much richer for the woman that's in that class.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Do you use props in your pregnancy yoga classes?
Yeah, you know, it's so funny. When I first started teaching prenatal yoga many years ago, I was at a studio that just had blankets. And so over time, you know, many of the poses we do modify and we use blankets to support and bolsters and blocks. But over time, what I found was that women were really showing me how to use these blankets in ways that I didn't realize. But there are certain poses that it's important to actually use blankets or bolsters. For instance, if it's a pose where a woman's laying on her back, say legs up the wall, or maybe a pose like bridge pose, but it's a resting pose. Um,
Yeah.
Something like Supta Baddha Konasana as well. We don't, as you know, as a doula, we don't want moms laying flat on their back just because of that vena cava artery. We don't want the weight of baby suppressing mom's oxygen or babies. So it is important to use a bolster or a few blankets, place those under mom's spine. And the nice thing is then she can come into these poses and really get a deep opening without having to not practice them. So kind of, I find the more that we use the modifications, the bolsters, the blocks, the more women can do. So that's really fun too.
Yeah, when I was doing pregnancy yoga, it was probably my first experience of using a bolster. I'd always done really active forms of yoga before then.
Yeah.
And I was like, I fell in love with the bolster.
Yeah,
Like, I had to go by two. It was my new best friend, the bolster.
very comforting. And I joke now because I've been teaching for so long, and now we've got like every mom has 2 blankets and a bolster and 2 blocks. And so now if I go to a regular prenatal, just to say a yoga class that is not for pregnant women, I'm getting all these blankets and bolsters. I'm doing all kinds of weird stuff because, you know, I know it's better that way.
Yeah, and bolsters are actually great once you've had baby, because like I would just, you know, obviously you've got to make it a little bit baby proof. Like otherwise it'll get milk stains all over it. But I would just put baby over the bolster, you know, to help baby's head stay up, and baby
Yeah,
had so much fun rocking those bolsters. And
it's fabulous.
what should a mum to be comfortable wear when she comes along to yoga class?
You know, typically just comfortable yoga clothes. You know, you want to keep in mind that you probably will be coming into poses like downward facing dog. So if you have on a really loose sort of tunic-y shirt, it might be up around your head. So you want to think about things that are just kind of comfortable, you know, yoga clothes that are fitted, not too tight, and comfy.
Yeah, yeah. Now you actually do something else as well, which is really important for new mums, which is the pelvic floor yoga. Now I don't know anything about it. I'm sorry if I've said it wrong. Do you want to like just give us a huge rundown of what that is, like for a total beginner?
Yeah, so you know, that's something I'm so passionate about. I had started quite a few years ago. I met a woman named Leslie Howard, who is out of Oakland, California. And she has a book called Pelvic Liberation. So check that out anytime that you can.
Public liberation. Okay.
Liberation. It's lesliehowardyoga.com. And she really is the yoga guru for women and the pelvic floor. So she began studying with physical therapists who specialize in the pelvic floor. She began doing research for UC San Francisco on women and these pelvic floor yoga poses, and found that when women practice the modifications for pelvic floor yoga, they actually have less incontinence, they have less, say, pain with intercourse, maybe after having pain with intercourse, and even less pelvic pain. And so I have a little model here for you, so of the female pelvis. So this is a small model, but it's fantastic for showing you your pelvic floor muscles. And first of all, what I love about this is typically when I would say something about the pelvic floor in yoga classes, most people I think are kind of like, well, I think it's down there somewhere, but they have no idea really where the muscles are. And actually your pelvic floor muscles, the beautiful hammock or bola muscles, runs from the front to the back of the pelvis and from side to side. And so when women come into poses, and again, these are research-based poses, where they're, again, moving the pelvis. How interesting, right? Things like cat and cow will stretch the muscles from front to back. Pelvic circles with one foot stepped out to the side and your foot flat on your mat will actually stretch the muscles from side to side. And then things like a pulsing downward facing dog, pulsing bridge pose, one-legged pulses for bridge pose, your warrior poses like warrior 2, and specifically triangle pose using a block for support, actually rotates the hips in a way that releases the pelvic floor. And so we have many poses which are so empowering and healing for the pelvic floor, and we just do small modifications and women really find relief. So that's something that I have in my book as well, which I'll share a little bit later. and also that I teach pelvic floor retreat days every other month or so in Sacramento, just for a few hours. And you always find someone, you know, every woman has a story to share, and it's so wonderful to know that yoga can be so healing. The other thing I have to say about that is it's important for women to know as they're in the childbearing years, having babies, that if they are having any symptoms of pain, incontinence, it really is important to get to a physical therapist who specializes in the pelvic floor, because often it's only 1 or 2 appointments, maybe 3, and women find that their symptoms actually do get much better, and there's so much that they can do to help women. So it's not normal after having a baby to pee your pants when you go jogging or run with your kids in the park. It's not normal to have pain with intercourse. So one thing is women can contact me. I make short videos on my Instagram and Facebook for pelvic floor yoga, just to share with women that can't get to classes. But also getting to a PT would be really important, that specializes as well.
Yeah, I did that. I think after my first birth, I went and saw a physio who specializes on, you know, pelvic floor.
Oh, great.
After pregnancy, and I had to see her with 3 or 4 times, you know, to get that relief. But it was, you know, it was life changing, because you know, you shouldn't put up with anything that's uncomfortable when there's help out there for you. That's really amazing, that whole domain of yoga, that specialty. I had no idea about that before, but that's a really good explanation, and I can see that you know would add like so much quality, you know, value to people's life, knowing that.
Yes, it's wonderful, and it's so empowering. And, you know, like I said, again and again, you find that women are holding this in. I don't think many women speak about it that much with each other. And so when you are in a prenatal yoga class and you are able to offer that up with a suggestion, and just get women speaking about it, you'll be amazed at how many women will come up after and speak about it. And so, you know, it's okay to talk about it, and that's the only way we can really heal.
So the pelvic floor yoga, is that something that you do, you wouldn't necessarily do that while you're pregnant, would you just do that after the birth?
So when I teach my retreat days, I offer modifications for pregnant women and postpartum women. And so my videos also have those modifications. So, and those are like on just social media, they're free. So women can practice those. I always modify, because when we have these workshops, there's usually women that are in their 20s, there's women that are pregnant, there's women that are in their 70s. So this fantastic circle of women. And so I just modify, you know, as if everybody was pregnant, because that usually helps the women that might be, maybe they have an injury or they're older. It just kind of incorporates everybody that way, and it slows it down for everyone.
That's beautiful. Now you've got also another big facet to what you offer, and that is about supporting birth partners. Do you want to tell us about what a birth partner is and what they do?
Sure. So you know, quite a few years ago, I started offering birth partner workshops. And what I found was, you know, oftentimes women will hire a doula the second time around, but it's those first time families sometimes that they're not so sure about that, and maybe they don't have enough information. So they kind of realize the second time, like, okay, we probably could have used a doula. And so what I wanted to do was hopefully empower birth partners. And birth partners are typically spouses. It could be a husband, a wife. Typically, that's who it is. Sometimes it's a mother, a grandmother. And empower the birth partner to support women mentally, physically, to know, you know, what to say, what not to say, hands-on comfort measures for things like back labor, learning these yoga poses in the workshop so that they can support women. And so, you know, it became something that I didn't realize I almost teach every single weekend, because people are very excited about, women are very excited about getting their partners empowered. And kind of the sweet thing about it that I didn't realize was that that really creates a bond with this couple when that birth partner is the one that takes on that role of, you know, the doula, and supports women in labor and childbirth. And they also go hand in hand with doulas. So sometimes, you know, these are still families that hire doulas, but now that birth partner feels empowered. They feel like they know how to peacefully advocate for mom and baby for a positive birth experience. So, you know, all of those little things that what I find is, another reason why I created it was some of the birth partner books are very daunting. They're really thick. You'd have to kind of be, a birth professional to read them. And I feel like birth partners need to have just really clear, specific support, and then they can take that and use it. Otherwise, sometimes it's too much to even absorb.
How should a mum, because we can't just take a whole tribe into a birth suite with us, how should a mum pick a birth partner that will support her?
Yeah, I think typically, one of the things I love to talk about, which you just reminded me of, is that, the birthing room is sacred space and it's intimate space. And so one of the things we know the research shows is that, for women to have a better chance at a natural vaginal labor, we need the lights to be dim. We need everyone in the room to be there to understand this is sacred space. And so one of the things that I often tell women when they're trying to decide who will be in the birthing room is a story about when I was a volunteer doula at UC Davis, at Sutter Davis Birthing Center in Davis. And one of the midwives there said, anybody in the birthing room supporting women should be able to ask who it's for before they say anything. And I've never forgotten that. That was almost 20 years ago. But typically, that's who you're looking for a doula or a birth partner, which is someone who can stop themselves. And probably 90% of the time, they don't need to say anything because they're going to be breathing with mom. She's going to hear them. They're going to be touching her with intention. They're going to be with her the whole time, but they're not going to be chatting and making jokes on their cell phone or talking to anyone else in the room about their weekend, And so this really helps families when I teach birth partner workshops. It helps them decide even who's in the room because, again, if women are supposed to be able to open up in labor and really come into this vulnerable, intimate space, it really is, very similar to making love or being intimate with their partner. So would you have your mother-in-law in the room? Would you have 4 or 5 relatives in the room? I don't think so. So that birth partner needs to be a really sacred person who gets that.
That's really beautiful advice. I love that. I'm glad that you and I are on the same wavelength, because when people say, oh, should I, my partner wants to bring in my mother-in-law, should I? I'm like, well, would your mother-in-law be there when you're on the toilet or when you're having sex?
Yeah, would you have a when you're it up very quickly. They get very clear, right? You get clear about it.
Yeah, because it is like that powerfully intimate, like, you're in your body and you're not really paying that much attention to what's around you, except, like you've said, that touch and that reassurance. But, to get to that state, it requires a lot of trust and, centeredness. When you are training birth partners, what is the really essential information they need to know?
I think number 1 would be ask who it's for before you say anything. Number 2 would be your job is to create sacred, intimate space wherever you're birthing. So if you're walking into that room, you're dimming the lights. If it's at the hospital, you're creating a cocoon for mom to really mimic her bedroom. So maybe you're bringing some candle lights. You're going to have a playlist of her favorite music. Even in a hospital setting, you can accomplish those small things which make a difference. And from there, I would say it's really, really important for a birth partner to understand birth breathing, which is something that I have in my Birth Wisdom Yoga book and on quite a few of my videos on social media as well. But just long, slow breathing is something they should begin practicing during the pregnancy together. So that I often say, you don't want to be trying this stuff out in labor. You want to start practicing breathing long and slow breaths together before you go to bed at night. Even 5 minutes a day makes such a difference. So
that's just going to end in kissing, which is good for oxytocin.
Making.
Yeah, I know where that's going. Oh, that's fantastic. Do you want to tell us a bit about your book, Julia?
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
So basically, this is my book. It's Birth Wisdom Yoga Remedies and Journal.
Oh, beautiful.
Thank you. It's funny because, about almost 20 years ago, as I began my work as a labor and birth doula, I noticed there were certain birth wisdoms and things that I witnessed in labor with women who had positive birth experiences And these were things like the breath, intuition, using their intuition, surrendering, um, tapping into the collective female power of all the women warriors birthing with them on that day or that night. And I had many stories that I heard over time. And I knew that someday I wanted to lace all of that birth and doula and woman's wisdom into a prenatal yoga class and then into a book for women. But I also knew that I wanted it to be a journal because ever since I began teaching prenatal yoga classes, we've had a special time at the end of class for journaling. And usually I'd have a prompt for women, which would be an affirmation that I had used in labor and birth with my doula clients and families, ones that they had told me they liked. So, you know, for many years, this was just a pile of notes because I, you know, was raising 3 children. Who are now, you know, 20 years old and 17 and 14. But for many years, it just was kind of piling on with affirmations women loved or the stories they loved. And then I just was able to finally get it all together in one place. So it's a weekly journal with the trimesters of pregnancy. And then the format of the book is actually a full yoga class, a prenatal birth wisdom yoga, prenatal yoga class. And then in the back are 2 more prenatal yoga flows. The nice thing is also it has all of the modifications for things in yoga that you do want to be aware of, like not creating a diastasis recti. So there are many yoga poses that we will practice over time that if women don't modify when pregnant, they could actually start separating those muscles in their abdominals.
Yeah, that's that separation of the muscles of the tummy, which we don't want.
And it's, you know, harder, so much harder later to heal if we've created that. And so we have sections in the book for exactly what those poses are. So things like chaturanga needs to be modified, but you have photos of every single pose has a photo. So there's over 35 photos to show the modification too. So, and then also things like if you have a breech baby, what to do, how to help turn babies with yoga, and a lot of common ailments women have had. It's just all from my classes and what women have shared with me over time. So it's available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million. I do offer discounts, you know, for someone who's seeing this interview, let me know, and I offer discounts in birth professionals and women out there.
Fantastic. We'll definitely include the links below to your book and your courses. You've brought like affirmations, totally got me through my second birth.
So totally, me too.
I just chanted them. Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear what your affirmations were. My affirmations, there was 3 of them. I'm beautiful. I think it was just I'm beautiful. Yeah. The second one was I'm big enough to birth this baby, and the third one was all pain is an illusion. But I mean, everyone's affirmations are going to be specific medicine for them, you know.
It gives me chills too, because I feel like it just is, you know, it's like a lifeline when you're pregnant, and especially I think the second, third, fourth time around when, you know, you kind of have an idea of what it was like, but you want to get back centered into that power and that strength, and those affirmations are just a total lifeline, you know. And one of the things I always talk about with my book is that these are things that you'll take into your daily lives. These don't end with labor and birth and mothering. These are real life, you know, qualities and strengths that women can find when they're pregnant, and they can use them in labor and for the rest of their lives. So it's just so empowering.
Affirmations in general are so powerful. It's like you just learn, like your word is law, like you just get to draw down on spirit and that creative form.
Train your mind to stop and just receive all the good stuff.
That's right. Yeah. And you've actually brought up some really good things there, like in your book, I'd totally forgotten about, like, you know, how I really did use yoga through both pregnancies to make sure that my baby was in the right position, you know, because there's an optimal position for birthing. You know, everyone's placenta is different. Some babies and bodies are just more likely to be breech, and you know, that's the luck of the draw. But you know, to the extent that you can you know, optimize where your baby is positioned, I so used yoga. Do you want to like tell us any of the yoga positions that you recommend for that are in your book?
Yeah, you know, some of the positions we recommend, you know, so in every Birth Wisdom prenatal yoga class, we have a hands and knees sequence. We know that these poses are optimal, right? So cat and cow, pelvic circles specifically stepping one foot out to the side. So we're opening up the hip wider, the foot is flat on the floor. Now we're rocking and rolling forward and back. Maybe leaning over a birth ball while you do that with some pillows under your knees would feel good too. And then also taking it to the wall and finding wall planks. So your hands are pressing into the wall, stepping back, feet are always wide, creating space in the pelvis and finding pelvic circles there. And then of course we love things like bridge pose with a tall block to kind of help babies. If women find out their baby is breached, then we're going to start doing things like that and holding that for a little bit more time, and even downward facing dog. So
yeah, well, I guess someone's probably going to need to look at your book to see exactly how to do the poses. But I remember like doing a lot of crawling around the house.
Oh, I know, right? There's just having your baby float off of your back. It just feels amazing. And so,
yeah,
me too.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, because yoga obviously has thousands of years of tradition. It's, you know, its roots are in not so much the body poses, but how connecting to our body can help us connect to our inner spirit, you know, and using breath. What do you think the wisdom is that yoga brings to pregnancy and birth?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I think it really comes down to finding breath and stillness. And I think that no matter what is going on in your labor, your pregnancy, if you can find stillness and connect to your breath, you're always going to tap into your birthing power, your birthing strength, your warrior wisdom, nature, your clarity on what feels good for you. So I often say what I love so much about the prenatal yoga classes is, you know, women are slowing down, they're breathing, and they're feeling what's good for them. And that's really my role, is to give them that space and then to really encourage them to change the pose where it feels good for them. And then to say, you know, imagine this yoga mat right here, you're preparing for labor and birth, because if you can kind of slow down, which nobody slows down that much anymore, if you can slow down and really feel what feels good, you're going to take that into your labor and you're going to say, well, no, I need this. I don't want to do that. That doesn't feel good to me. Actually, I'm going to move over here. And, you know, what is more powerful than that for a woman in labor than to know what she needs and to do it? And it all begins in the kind of the wisdom of a yoga class is to slow it down and to breathe and feel. So that's one of the greatest things I think about a woman being pregnant in a prenatal yoga class.
I think you've absolutely, you know, hit the nail on the head there, because it's that experience of knowing to follow that good feeling and that you're allowed to follow that feeling. And that no one else is allowed to say, no, don't follow that good feeling. Like, that's my good feeling. I'm following it. You know, either get behind me or get out, kind of thing. And that's like a really new experience, I think, for a lot of women. Suddenly, like, that's new to know that they're allowed to follow that good feeling.
It is, you know, and it's so funny because I remember when I first started teaching prenatal yoga, so much of the classes for me are about slowing it down so women find stability, they connect to the breath, then they have all these beautiful layers we just spoke about opening up for them. But every once in a while I'd have a woman that would maybe had been doing some really hardcore workouts still, and they would say, okay, so when are you going to start pushing us, you know? And what was so funny about that is I would, you know, explain, you know, we're really here to tap into what feels good for you. So we do need that space and time in the poses, and we're going to do challenging poses, but we're not going to move through them quickly. But those were the women that would be the diehards. They'd never miss a class because they'd been given permission to slow down and to actually go, does this even feel good to me? Do I even like Warrior One? You know, do I even want to be in this pose right now? Do my arms actually feel good up here? Or are they tingling and I actually need to come back and stretch behind me? And so what I love about that is just watching women get permission to slow down, to tap into what feels good, then to actually do it and go, no, you don't get to tell me what I'm going to do in my labor and birth. I actually know what feels good for me. And then, you know, from there, they peacefully advocate. They take that voice into their labor. And so in a way, I feel like, yes, I can doula through my classes when that's the type of class I create. And that's just the most wonderful thing in the world.
That sounds so beautiful. How can people come and do your courses and work with you?
Thank you. You know, my website is birthwisdomyoga.com. And so my trainings are there. and all my contact information, so they can always contact me and go for there. And I even make videos like for people. I just, you know, had a woman in New Mexico. I made her a pelvic floor yoga video specifically for her. So I love doing custom things like that as well for people that just aren't going to make it out to California anytime soon.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for being with us today, Julia. Before you go, I like to just ask a really general question, and you can answer it however you like. But I mean, for you, I think I'd really love to ask you, like, what you think the healing power of birth is.
You know, I think the healing power of birth is, again, it all is related to what we're speaking about, which is women have a primal part of their brain that they tap into when they're in labor and childbirth. And never before have they tapped into this part of the brain and this strength. And so I think that when women go through labor and find that power in their voice and they feel it, it's very healing on so many levels, you know, because it could be someone who hasn't used their voice in the past or had an opportunity to really feel what's good for them and then speak up and do what that is. So I also think even the way that we kind of run around quickly multitasking, we lose sight of the sacred and the ritual and the primal part of who we are. And in birth, there's no denying it. You know, we say often, as you know, as a doula, that, you know, women are in labor land when they're in labor and childbirth. They're not in the logical part of their brain. And that's why everything's just sort of hazy and kind of odd. As in active labor, we're just flooded with these fantastic hormones so that we can get through labor. It makes us kind of spaced out. It's very primal. It's very, you know, very intense. And so I think that tapping into that is healing on so many levels and life-changing. And that's why my book is, and my class is, Everything is Birth Wisdom Yoga, because there's a wisdom in birth that, you know, heals on many, many levels for women.
That's beautiful. It's certainly an experience like no other, of, you know, of being in the present moment. Like all thoughts of past and future out the window. You're right there.
I say that often. You will never be more present than you are when you're in labor and childbirth.
Yeah. Well, it's been beautiful speaking with you today, Julia. I hope you have a great time at your teacher training, and that maybe everyone, you know, finds a way to, you know, read your book and connect with you and learn more.
Thank you. It's a total pleasure to be here and to see you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, everyone, and enjoy the next Learning to Birth webinar.
Yay, bye.